I figured Alicia would be over the moon when I told her I had the entire week off work. As a heavy equipment mechanic, I usually found myself putting in a lot of hours, so this unexpected break was like a breath of fresh air. She had planned a 3-day getaway with her sisters at Lake Winona, where they typically rented cabins for a little family bonding, swimming, hiking, and cozy nights around the campfire. I had already told her I wouldn't be able to join them because of work commitments, and she seemed to understand, given that it was the middle of the week. That overtime pay was definitely a lifesaver for us. Even so, missing out on these family outings always left a bitter taste in my mouth. So I was genuinely relieved that I could finally take a breather. "Hey, guess what, honey? I'm able to join you all this time," I said, excitement bubbling up inside me. "That's amazing, Caleb. The kids will be thrilled, and I think you'll have a blast too if that's okay with you." "I'm bringing the dirt bike," she replied, her eyes lighting up. "There are some trails up there I'm dying to explore. I'll only ride if you're cool with it. I don't want to cause any drama," I added, trying to gauge her mood. "That sounds fantastic. There's so much mountain terrain around Lake Winona, so you'll have a great time. Just make sure to enjoy yourself." Alicia encouraged, her enthusiasm infectious. While she busied herself preparing dinner, I took the opportunity to head outside and get the dirt bike ready. It wasn't your typical off-road bike. It was a street-legal two-stroke that could handle some rough patches if ridden carefully. I rarely got the chance to take it out around home. By the time I finished tinkering with it, dinner was just about on the table. Alicia and I had been married for 12 years and had 3 kids. Chloe, who was 11, Dylan, who was 8, and Owen, who was 7. We lived in a cozy little frame house with a hefty mortgage hanging over us, but overall, life was treating the Morgan family fairly well. After we cleaned up from dinner, the kids plopped down in front of the TV, and I jumped in for a quick shower. I noticed Alicia wrapping up something on the computer, so I decided to pop into the room to grab my trail maps. As I rummaged through the closet, I caught her quickly deleting something and logging off. I played it cool, acting like I hadn't seen anything while I searched for my maps. She flashed me a smile before leaving the room, and once I was sure she was downstairs, I decided to take a peek at her email. The inbox was empty. If there had been any messages, I knew she would have erased them. I checked the deleted items folder, just in case. Alicia was usually super careful with her emails. I never really questioned her about it. She had a habit of double-deleting everything, making sure nothing remained. But this time, something caught my eye. She had deleted a file, but hadn't fully wiped it from the deleted items. There it was, change in plans. "Caleb will be coming up with the family. You can still join, but I'll have Rachel put you in the last cabin. We should have some time together because he'll be riding his motorcycle. See ya." The message was addressed to someone named Nina Fisher, and an icy chill ran down my spine. Who the hell was Nina Fisher, and why was she coming to our family gathering? What did Alicia's sister Rachel have to do with any of this? While Alicia was busy washing the kids' clothes for the trip, I grabbed her high school yearbook from the shelf. It didn't take long to find Brandon Fisher's photo. There was even a snapshot of Alicia and Brandon together at prom. I had never considered myself particularly perceptive, and I usually didn't dwell on suspicions, but maybe I should have paid more attention. I had always thought our marriage was rock solid. I met Alicia about 2 years after she graduated high school. I was 3 years older and had a stable job. After dating for about 6 months, I proposed, and she said yes without hesitation. Now, I found myself questioning why, if she had history with this guy in high school, she chose to marry me instead. I made a decent living, even though I wasn't particularly ambitious. I worked hard for my family and often sacrificed my own needs for theirs, thinking it was worth it. But now, doubts began to creep in. I had never been fond of kids, but my own were a different story. I would do anything for them simply because they were mine. I was fiercely protective as a father. This weekend was bound to be eventful. The kids wasted no time racing down to the lake while I unloaded everything, including the dirt bike. Alicia's sister Laura was there with her 4 kids, and their younger sister Vanessa, who was divorced, brought along her 3 little ones too. Laura's husband, Brian, couldn't make it, which left me feeling like the odd man out for the weekend, aside from the extra guy in our cabin. Once we settled in, I noticed a dark green Durango parked next to the last cabin. After a quick lunch, I announced that I was heading out for a ride. I had the bike all ready and grabbed the video camera before taking off. The bike was a loud little beast, and I was sure Alicia was counting on that to keep track of my whereabouts. I rode about a quarter mile, let the bike idle for a while, and then switched it off. It took me roughly 10 minutes to walk back to the campgrounds. The three sisters were gathered around the picnic table, chatting away while the kids played all over the place. Then a tall, handsome guy, who I assumed was the one driving the Dodge Durango, approached the table. All the women greeted him like an old friend. After about 10 minutes, he stood up and strolled away, heading around the cabins and toward the changing rooms. Just as I was making my way over, I caught sight of Alicia leaving the table and coming our way. Brandon slipped into the ladies' side entrance to go unnoticed, and Alicia followed him shortly after. I quietly moved to the other side and turned on the video camera, not bothering to take off the lens cap since nothing was happening just yet. I pressed in close to the adjoining wall, straining to hear their conversation. "I'm really sorry, Brandon. I had no idea Caleb would be coming today. I'll try to make it up to you," Alicia said. "He'll probably be out riding his motorcycle most of the time, so all we have to do is watch the kids," Brandon replied. "It's okay, Alicia, I get it. Sure, I'm a little let down, but it's fine. It'll still be a good time. There's a sing-along tonight by the cabins. I'll sneak down to the lake later, and we can go for a swim together, just like old times. Laura will keep Caleb busy," Alicia added. "I don't know if I can wait that long," Brandon said, sounding impatient. "Oh, you're a silly boy. Let's see. I think I can take care of you just enough to make it until dark," Alicia purred. I heard a zipper slide open and the soft rustle of clothing as Brandon started to moan. It quickly became painfully obvious she was giving him oral pleasure. I listened closely, the sound of Alicia's slurping and humming filling my ears. Soon, Brandon was breathing faster, and after a few coughs followed by the unmistakable sound of spitting, Alicia let out a giggle. "Okay, Brandon, that should hold you over until tonight. I need to get back to my sisters." I sat there in stunned silence, my heart shattering. But what did I expect? I was sneaking around trying to catch her, and I got what I came for. I guess I was disappointed that it happened at all, but deep down I knew it was inevitable. I lingered in the bathhouse for another 10 minutes after they left, struggling with what to do next. It felt depressing, and I hated feeling like that. While I didn't get any video, I managed to capture about 10 minutes of clear audio on the camera. I walked back to my bike and took off for a long, rough ride. Confronting Alicia would have been easy, but that wasn't my style. Honestly, I don't really have a style. I just avoid confrontation whenever I can. For 12 years, I thought I had a great marriage, only to realize I was just the guy who provided for my wife and kids, a necessary convenience. I spent the afternoon wandering around the area near the beach. There was a long, grassy slope leading down to the water, and the beach itself was narrow, bordered by rocks and woods. In the center, about 50 feet from the water, was a fire pit. Alicia, Laura, and Vanessa had taken the kids on a hike to a nearby waterfall, so I took the opportunity to gather and arrange a good pile of wood in the fire pit. I laid down kindling at the bottom and carefully stacked some nice, dry logs on top. I even found some cardboard to layer underneath for an easier start. There weren't many people around, so I managed to stay unnoticed. When everyone got back from their hike, I didn't see Brandon anywhere. I took Dylan and Owen into the woods with me to gather about 20 solid sticks for roasting marshmallows later. I asked them to keep it a secret for the evening, and they were beyond excited. Chloe got 2 big bags of marshmallows, and I filled her in on the plan. As the evening came on, everyone gathered around the picnic area. We enjoyed a hearty supper, and the kids started winding down. Laura was unusually chatty, sticking close to me and asking for help with every little thing, being overly friendly. All the while, I kept an eye on Alicia without being too obvious. Finally, as the sun dipped and only a sliver of moonlight was left, a debate came up over what to do next. It seemed like telling ghost stories was about to win. That's when I noticed Alicia had disappeared, but Laura was still glued to my side, rambling on about how her husband, Brian, was remodeling their kitchen. She was trying hard to keep me engaged, but my mind was elsewhere. I eventually excused myself, saying I needed to head to the cabin to grab the video camera, which was conveniently in the opposite direction from the lake. Laura didn't seem too concerned. It was too dark to get any good footage anyway, so I left the camera behind and instead grabbed 2 cans of charcoal lighter fluid and some wooden matches. By sneaking behind the cabins, I managed to make my way down to the beach without Laura seeing me. The moonlight gave just enough light to keep me from stumbling. As I got closer, I quieted down. I could see 2 figures in the water by the shore, near a blanket with their clothes and towels strewn on top. It was Alicia and Brandon. Carefully, I gathered all 4 corners of the blanket and walked over to the fire pit. I poured 1 can of lighter fluid over the wood, laid the blanket on top, and drenched it with the second can. With a quick flick of my wrist, I tossed a match onto the pile and jumped back as the wood erupted into flames. I was too slow, though, singed my eyebrows and arm hair. That was the signal. Chloe and Dylan jumped up, shouting, "Marshmallow roast! Everybody to the bonfire!" Within seconds, all the kids dashed down the hill toward the fire pit. I glanced over toward the water and saw Alicia. The light from the fire reflected in her and Brandon's wide eyes as they stared at the crowd of children rushing toward them. Laura was at the top of the hill, looking like her world was crumbling. The kids quickly gathered around the fire, Dylan handing out sticks and Chloe prepping the marshmallows. Alicia tried to hide alongside the dock as I calmly approached. Her lover stood there, looking flustered. "Hey, Brandon. I'm Caleb, Alicia's husband. Nice to finally meet you," I said. He didn't say a word, just looked stunned. I turned to Alicia. "Need a hand getting up the ladder so you can join your kids around the campfire?" "No. Damn it, Caleb. Just go get our towels from the blanket," she snapped. "Sorry, honey, but I used the blanket, towels, and your clothes to start the fire." "Nice blaze, isn't it?" "What? No, Caleb. Why the hell would you do that? How are we supposed to get out of the water?" she yelled. "Oh, I'm sure Laura will be more than willing to help you," I said, turning to leave. "I'm going home." And with that, I made my way off the dock as Laura rushed past me. I grabbed my jacket and the videotape from the cabin, and with the valve stem tool from my dirt bike's tool bag, I removed all 4 valve stems from Alicia's SUV tires, making sure she'd be stranded until at least the next day. I tried to loosen the petcock on Brandon's Durango with a pair of pliers, but it wouldn't budge. After a few forceful hits, it finally snapped off. Since the Dodge wasn't locked, I reached inside and snagged the registration from the glove box. I figured Alicia might take one of her sister's cars, but she'd most likely wait until she could use her own. I turned off my phone and left the campsite on my dirt bike, heading for the highway. The ride was rough and long, and I didn't get far before I had to stop to refuel and mix some oil into the gas. Thankfully, it was late, and the roads were mostly empty. Once back on the road, I pushed the bike to cover as many miles as possible. A green Durango sped past me, trailing a cloud of white vapor from underneath. About 10 miles down, I saw it pulled over with Brandon Fisher under the hood, trying to figure out what was wrong. I sped past without drawing attention, aiming for the next gas station. A bigger tank would have helped a lot. After filling up, I grabbed a cup of coffee and checked the registration I had taken from Brandon. He lived in Pottsville, which meant I could cut over right then and be there within an hour. Once I arrived, it took another hour to track down his exact address. He lived in a modest frame house just on the south side of town. I couldn't tell if it was his place or if he was renting, but either way, I assumed he wouldn't be home for quite a while. So I broke a window on the kitchen door and let myself in. Inside, I found a small computer setup in the bedroom. There was a nut driver in the desk drawer, which I used to remove the side panel of the CPU. I pulled out the hard drive and glanced around for anything else that might be useful. A CD album on the desk caught my eye, containing about 20 discs. I grabbed the album along with the hard drive and quickly left. Less than 2 hours later, including another stop for gas, I made it back home. I was thankful for the king cab in my pickup. It allowed me to stash my clothes, PC, and other household items behind the seat. After gathering a bunch of personal papers and important documents, I headed to a motel on the far side of town. It was 3 a.m., and I desperately needed sleep because tomorrow was going to be hectic. But despite my exhaustion, I got up early. It took some time, but eventually, I managed to access Brandon's hard drive. At dawn, I discovered all the emails between him and Alicia. Most were in the documents folder, but some were still in his mail. I started skimming through them, but quickly realized that going through everything would take all day. Their exchanges were intimate, no doubt about that, but surprisingly, none of the emails were explicit. And there were no derogatory comments about me. Quite the opposite, actually. There were several positive remarks. Alicia praised the great job I did when I installed the new kitchen cabinets, and Brandon responded by saying he wished he were as handy as I was. It struck me as bizarre, two people cheating behind my back, but without any trash talk about me. I was left feeling utterly confused. The CDs told a different story, though. No pornographic images, just tons of pictures of them together, doing various things, nothing inappropriate. Alicia's hair color changed in each set of photos. Dark and short when she was pregnant with Chloe, auburn when she was expecting Dylan, and long and dark when pregnant with Owen. And in all those pictures, Brandon had the nerve to look like a proud father, which stung more than anything. I knew it was time to move on. I went through my usual routine, closing all bank accounts and credit cards, quitting my job, and collecting any remaining vacation pay and sick leave. I cashed in my life insurance policies and canceled my cell phone service. I arranged to have the utilities at the house shut off by the end of the week. There were likely loose ends I'd forgotten, but I did my best to cover everything. I made a stop at the family doctor's office, where a nurse took a DNA swab to send to my lawyer. After that, I went straight to my lawyer's office to start the divorce process. I told Daniel to fight for Alicia to get nothing and to only offer child support if the DNA test confirmed the kids were mine. By that point, I didn't have much hope. I left $2,000 in the joint checking account for Alicia and the kids, stating that she could keep the house, but only if she took over the payments herself. I also signed 2 power of attorney forms in case Daniel needed them. One of the forms was specifically to assist Alicia in selling the house. Yuba City was far enough from Reading that I'd have a decent start, and I had enough money to get by for a while. But I knew I'd need to find work soon if I wanted to keep my sanity. Sure, I'd probably left behind a few messes, possibly even a breaking and entering chargeback in Shasta County. I had no idea what other loose threads I might have left back at home, but frankly, I didn't care. I was never particularly clever when it came to staying under the radar. My car registration, driver's license, and insurance were valid for now, but I'd eventually need to update everything and risk getting noticed. Getting paid under the table would keep things manageable for a while. Every morning, groups of men looking for day labor would gather on certain street corners, waiting for employers to drive by and pick out who they needed. The work was hard, but the pay was cash, handed directly to us as independent contractors. No social security numbers, no forms, just cold, untraceable cash. I didn't mind the labor or the low pay, but it bothered me not being able to talk to my coworkers. So I started picking up a bit of Spanish, which made things better. After a while, I became a regular pick for the Sutter Nut Growers foreman. They grew all kinds of nuts, walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, and pistachios. The work was demanding, but it didn't take much thinking, and I slept well at night. About a month in, I borrowed a phone from one of the supervisors and called my lawyer. He said Alicia had been served with the divorce papers. She didn't ask for anything from me, but insisted on some support for the kids. Since she hadn't provided any DNA test results, I made it clear I wasn't going to pay for children who might not even be mine. Her family was helping her out with expenses until she found a job, and she'd already put the house up for sale. If all went smoothly, the divorce would be final in about 4 months. Brandon Fisher hadn't reported anything to the police, so I figured I didn't need to keep hiding. In the evenings, I'd go through the emails and look at the pictures on the CDs. Around 4 years ago, Alicia and Laura had gone on a weekend cruise to Nassau. Alicia was with Brandon, while Laura was with some other guy. Definitely not her husband, Brian. From the emails, I found out his name was Adam Collins. The pictures were hard to look at. It was clear that Alicia and Brandon had shared a cabin. I'd loved Alicia and would have done anything for her, so trying to come to terms with this information was brutal. How could I have been so naive? At work, Sutter Nut Growers had 2 large tree shakers. One was already down when I started, and today the second one broke. The company had to call a serviceman from Sacramento, and they sent everyone home early. I asked the supervisor if I could take a look at the shaker, and in about an hour, I got it running. The guys were happy to be able to finish out their shifts. I spent the rest of the day working on the other shaker, and finally got that one going by around 7 that evening. Everyone had left by then, so my supervisor, Peter, offered to drive me home. On the way, he offered me a full-time position as an equipment repairman, and I accepted right away. About a month later, when I came home from work, there was a budget rental car in my driveway. It was Brian Davis, Laura's husband, who had somehow tracked me down. Brian was sitting on my porch, giving me a half-smile as I walked up. I wasn't exactly happy to see him, but I tried to keep it friendly. "How long have you been waiting, Brian?" I asked. "About 2 hours. A cold beer would be nice if you have any." I grabbed 2 Fosters from the fridge, and we sat down across from each other at the Formica kitchen table. "So, what's important enough to bring you almost 3,000 miles out here, Brian?" Alicia asked me to come. Her parents covered the cost of the ticket. "All right, let's hear it. What's your goal here?" I asked. "Well, I've been trying to figure out how to say this the whole flight over. I'll start with something not many people know about Laura and me. Does this have anything to do with Adam Collins?" I asked. "Yeah, I guess it wasn't as much of a secret as we thought," Brian said with a half-hearted smile. All 3 of the Spencer sisters, Alicia, Laura, and Vanessa, always wanted big families. It was important to them, and to their parents too. Laura and I were married for 2 years and weren't able to have any kids. Turned out the issue was with me. I was sterile, while Laura was perfectly fertile. We didn't want to adopt, and we couldn't afford fertility treatments. After a lot of discussions, we agreed to find someone to help Laura get pregnant. It was a strange decision, but we thought it through. Adam was a high school friend of Laura's. They dated before she met me, and he was one of the ushers at our wedding. I liked the guy, so we sat down with Adam and explained the situation. He was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed, under some conditions. "Conditions?" I asked, leaning in. "Yeah." Adam said he'd help Laura get pregnant as many times as we needed, but he wanted to spend time with her once a month and have 1 weekend a year with her, on those terms, until he found a wife. All 4 of our kids are his. A few years ago, I was the best man at his wedding, and since then, he hasn't seen Laura. "So how does this relate to Alicia and me?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. "Well, it's similar, but not exactly the same. I assume you'll explain," I said. "Yeah," Brian continued. "Alicia and Brandon Fisher were sweethearts going back to junior high school. They had their whole future planned out. But then, right after high school, Brandon had a bad water skiing accident. While he could still, have sex, he couldn't father kids. That crushed Alicia because having children was her dream. So, Brandon convinced her to go ahead and marry someone else to start her family, but that they'd still stay very close." "You mean friends with benefits close?" I shot back. "Yeah, Caleb, bluntly put, that's pretty much it," Brian admitted. I listened carefully to Brian's words. Some of it seemed sincere, but other parts felt like a stretch. I let him keep talking. "So, eventually, Alicia agreed to the arrangement, but insisted that Brandon help find a husband for her. Brandon didn't want to pick someone local, so he reached out to a friend he knew in Reading, a guy named Sean Hayes. I think he worked on some of Sean's fuel oil trucks. Yeah, Sean seemed like a decent guy. They narrowed it down to 3 candidates, and Alicia picked you. She went after you, convinced you to marry her, and let you think it was your own idea. You gave her a stable home, a happy marriage, and 3 beautiful kids. She tried to be a loving wife, but all the while, she kept her relationship with Brandon. Over time, though, She got closer to you and spent less time with him. Alicia and Laura even tried setting Brandon up with other women, but he wasn't interested. He wanted to keep what he had with her. Brian reached into his coat pocket and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a DNA report with a letterhead from Shasta County Scientific Labs. I expected just a standard form, but it was a formal letter declaring I was the biological father of all three of my kids. I glanced at the report, then looked back at Brian, who sat quietly. "That everything, Brian?" I asked. "Well, Alicia broke things off with Brandon right after you left. She figured it'd be better for her and the kids. She was hoping that with Brandon completely out of the picture, you might reconsider the divorce and come back." I grabbed a couple more beers from the fridge, not saying much, just staring at that piece of paper. I could hardly believe Brian had flown all the way across the country to unload this on me. Maybe there was some truth in it somewhere, but I couldn't be sure. I'd never really understood why Alicia married me. And after hearing all of this, I was still confused. "What time's your flight back?" I finally asked. "I need to be at the Sacramento terminal by 8. I've got just enough time to drive there and return the rental car." "Thanks for letting me talk to you, Caleb. I know we could have done this over the phone, but I thought coming here in person might have more of an impact." "Anything you want me to tell Alicia or the kids when I get back?" he asked. "She's really hoping to hear something good. She was heartbroken when you left." "Nothing comes to mind," I replied. "Just give them my best and let them know I'm thinking about them." As I walked Brian back to his car, I could tell he was expecting more of a reaction than what he got from me. His story was interesting, especially the part about his situation with Laura. If what he said was true, maybe I'd have to rethink the divorce. But there were too many unanswered questions. I still cared deeply for Alicia. We'd shared a lot of good years, and I always thought we were a solid team. Her betrayal hurt like hell, but if there was a chance to patch things up, I was open to it. I just needed more answers and clarity. I still couldn't wrap my head around Brian flying out here for a 30-minute chat. The next day, I called my lawyer, Daniel. "Hey, it's Caleb Morgan calling from California." "Caleb, it's been a while. What's going on?" "First of all, did you get any results from the DNA paternity tests?" "Nope, nothing so far. I've asked Alicia about it 3 times, and she promised to follow through each time, but I still have nothing. I even offered to cover the cost of the tests, but that didn't seem to matter." "Well, her brother-in-law gave me a letter from Sugar Hill Scientific Labs in Pottsville saying I'm the father. Did they use any samples from my tests for comparison? I've never even heard of that lab, and your results are still here with me. Unless they use some hair or nail clippings of yours to run their own test, I don't know what they'd be comparing. I'll look into it. Anything else?" "Yeah, see what you can find out about Brandon Fisher in Pottsville. Something's off, and I want to know more about him. I know the divorce is nearly wrapped up, and I don't want to mess things up, but if I can avoid a mistake, I want to. Shouldn't be a problem. And don't worry, you've still got a nice buffer in your account. I'll let you know if funds get low." A week later, Daniel called me back. He told me that Sugar Hill Scientific Labs was a fake DNA testing facility that the state had shut down. He also found out that Brandon Fisher barely scraped through high school and struggled to keep a job. He'd just been fired as a fuel truck driver and couldn't find work anywhere in the Pottsville area. People described him as a friendly guy, but not very bright. That evening, when I got home from work, Chloe, Dylan, and Owen ran up to me as I got out of the truck, hugging me and showering me with love as I made my way to the porch. Alicia was standing there waiting. "What's going on? To what do I owe this surprise?" I asked. "I thought the kids should be with their dad. Since you wouldn't come back to Pennsylvania, I decided to bring them here myself. I rented a place across the river in Marysville. How about I order some pizza while we get settled in?" I suggested. The kids excitedly talked over each other, sharing stories of their cross-country drive. They didn't stop much, but it was clear they'd seen a lot of new and exciting things. Alicia mostly stayed quiet, letting the kids have their moment. I put the TV on, and they finally began to unwind. After dinner, Alicia and I cleaned up the mess together. "Caleb, I'm sorry for how things ended up," she said quietly. "I was hoping Brian could explain it all better, but I guess he didn't do a great job. The day after you found me with Brandon, I ended it with him. It was a mistake to let it go on for so long." She paused, trying to find the right words. "I've known for a while now that my marriage to you is way more important than my friendship with Brandon. We were so close for so long that breaking those ties was really tough. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth. Since that day at the camp, I haven't seen Brandon, and I have no intention of ever seeing him again. I hope you realize that you're the one I love, Caleb, and that you're who I want to build a life with. You're the father of my kids, and I want you to be in their lives. Alicia, I'm not sure what to say. You've really caught me off guard here. There's just so much I don't understand, and maybe some things I'd rather not know. It's really nice to see the kids again, and I'd like to be involved with them. I'm not ready to jump back into anything serious between us, but I'm open to trying, at least for the kids' sake. That's totally fine, and I get it. I'm not trying to rush anything. I've got a job lined up at a restaurant in Marysville, starting next week. It's mostly evenings and weekends. I'd really appreciate it if you could help watch the kids during my shifts until I get everything settled." "That makes sense. Will you be bringing them over to my place? Or should I pick them up?" "I'll bring them over here and pick them up when I'm done," I said. It seemed like a straightforward plan. On the first day, I swabbed the inside of each of the kids' mouths for a DNA test and sent the samples to Daniel. Chloe started to open up more than usual around me, and it was clear she felt uneasy about what was happening between Alicia and me. I tried to keep the divorce and everything else from affecting the kids, so I made sure not to mention anything to them. A week later, a letter came from Brian, containing a newspaper clipping and a short note. FYI. The clipping showed Brandon wearing a soldier's uniform. He completed basic training and was being deployed to Bosnia for 2 years. I called Chloe over. "Hey, Chloe, do you know this guy?" I asked, pointing to the photo. "Yeah, that's Uncle Brandon, but we're not supposed to talk about him," she said matter-of-factly. "Do you see Uncle Brandon often?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "We used to, but Mom told us we couldn't tell you because it would make you upset." "Did you see him after I left?" "Yes," she nodded. "Where at?" "Mostly at Chuck E. Cheese or places like that. Mom and Uncle Brandon would talk while we played the games." "Did he ever stay over at our house?" I asked carefully. "Only once. It was a week before we left to come here, right before he joined the army." "Tell me about that night," I urged gently. "Okay, but I'm not supposed to tell." "He came to our house in a cab. He told Mom he'd joined the army and was leaving for Philadelphia the next morning. Mom started crying and hugging him, saying all kinds of mushy stuff. Dylan, Owen, and I went inside to watch TV while they talked. She cried a lot and said things I didn't really understand. We went to bed, but they were still talking. Later that night, I came down to get a drink, and he wasn't on the couch anymore. The next morning, I saw him getting into another cab, and Mom was still crying. That afternoon, Mom said we were going to California to see you. But please, don't tell her I told you all this, or she'll be super mad." "Did your mom cry when I left?" I asked quietly. "No," Chloe replied without hesitation. Everything was starting to fall into place, piece by piece. It was becoming clear that whatever Brian hoped to accomplish with that newspaper clipping, it wasn't going to work. I'd wanted to find a way to reconcile with Alicia, but all of a sudden, doubt clouded everything. Confronting her with everything I knew would have been easy, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Maybe I was just too much of a coward to face the truth about someone I'd once loved deeply. I didn't doubt Chloe for a second, but what she told me completely contradicted what both Brian and Alicia had said. It was becoming painfully clear who was telling the truth. Sitting in the Seattle airport, my phone suddenly rang. "Dad, it's Chloe." "Where are you?" "I'm at the Seattle airport, sweetheart." "When are you coming back home?" she asked, her voice sounding small and far away. "Not for another 10 months, honey. I signed a contract for this job, so I'll be tied up for quite a while." "Mom's really mad at me for telling you about Uncle Brandon. She says we're going back to Reading as soon as she gets her final paycheck from the restaurant." "I'm sorry to hear that, Chloe. I didn't mean to get you in trouble with your mom. Just remember, you haven't done anything wrong. This whole mess, it's not your fault, okay? And I'm going to miss you, and I'm sure Dylan and Owen will miss you too." I'm sorry you had to go away, Dad, but I think I understand. I love you, honey. And make sure you tell Dylan and Owen I love them too. After that call, I reached out to Daniel. The DNA test results are back. None of the kids are mine. It was all just another lie from Brian and Alicia. The divorce will be finalized in 2 weeks, I told him. I'll send support for the kids as long as there's no more trouble. He agreed to handle all the arrangements for me. It's freezing cold up here in Prudhoe Bay, but at least some of my wounds are starting to heal.